an honor to be with you today, and I know everyone who's attending this conversation is excited to hear from you and about the importance and significance of Trans Day of Visibility. So for those who don't know, International Trans Day of Visibility was created in 2010 by trans advocate Rachel Crandall, and it is about celebrating the lives and contributions of transgender people. So while there is so much violence, discrimination, harassment, and marginalization that the trans community faces, today is really about uplifting, elevating, and spotlighting the trans community and what we bring into our communities. So as we dig into this, obviously visibility is a complicated topic for a lot of people, but I'd like to ask each of you, what role does visibility play in the work that you do, specifically in entertainment, in acting, in producing? And I will turn it over first to Rain, if you would start us off.
Oh gosh, now I'm nervous. So what does visibility mean for me in terms of like my work and entertainment?
Mm-hmm.
I think that is something that I'm continuing to find answers for, because I'm a very private person. But I also know that growing up, I didn't have representation that I can point to, that I can say, oh, that's me or that's who I am. I didn't even know the word transgender for a really long time. So for me, whenever I do something with my work and in entertainment, and it's out there, my work is out there, and I always think about the younger version of myself that gets to see that and gets to see a success story and gets to see possibilities of who they can become. And a lot of my work has a lot, as you know, has a lot to do with aspirational content, romantic comedies and comedy in general. And so I always kind of gravitated to those stories and to those mediums, but there was always such a lack of us in those genres and in those mediums. And so I always wondered why. And then the more I learned about our industry and the more I was here and sort of struggling and trying to find my way, I started to realize it's actually not necessarily our fault. It's just sort of how the system was built and how it was created. And I always think about the feeling of imposter syndrome and how I occasionally will find myself in a space wondering, why do I feel like I don't belong here? I start kind of questioning, my presence there. And again, unpacking more of our history here in Hollywood as trans people, it's not so much that I don't belong, it's that Hollywood and white supremacy and patriarchy have created a system to continually oppress us. And so my feeling of imposter syndrome has just sort of this consequence, right? So my visibility, as hard as it is to be visible in our daily lives, because again, like I'm a very private person, but at the same time, I love my work. I love what I do. It becomes sort of like a necessity because there's such a need for us, and shows like Pose and Razor Tongue and Studio City, and so it's no wonder that we're here, I think. And I think that as hard as it is, not because of what's happening with the all these anti-trans legislations that are being introduced as bills, I also have to remember that there's a target on my back too. So as much as I represent a community, I also carry the burden of my own pain and my own vulnerability. And so with that, it's almost become such a more important to stand very proudly on my platform and kind of speak from a place of love and speak from a place of possibilities and hope, because there are people like me who are targets and they don't necessarily have that platform. And so I do it for them. I do it for me, that's what visibility is.
Thank you, Rain. And I think you brought up so much about the work you do in providing possibilities and visibility for others and using your platform where you can. I mean, I know that Pose has had such an impact on people feeling finally seen. It's not as if trans people and Black trans people have not been around forever. It's that they haven't been seen in authentic and accurate light. So Dominique, I would love to know from you, what has the impact on being on a show like Pose done for you personally? I think you're on, yeah.
Oh, I apologize. I always do that. For me personally, being on Pose is validating and acknowledging to my work, to my ability to be an actor, to my ability to be able to play these roles. I must say that everything that Rain said was so profound and it landed, and I very much relate. With a show like Pose, there is visibility, but there's also the backlash that we do receive from that. And that is that you're so visible now, people are afraid of you and they're afraid of the change that you can bring to the world. So being a part of Pose was both amazing and fulfilling and spoke to my validation as a human being, putting progress into this world and contributing and adding my value to this world. And then there's the fact that there is that target on my back. There is the fact that there are those 4 or 5 comments that are going to be transphobic, that are going to be derogatory, that are going to be about my race, about the fact that I am an immigrant, you know? So Pose does bring that visibility. It lets that person know. If as a child growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, on the smaller island of Tobago, if I had seen a show like Pose, it would have probably changed my life back then, but now I wouldn't have a job.
And we're really happy that you do, because everybody, I'm sure, who's on this call loves Pose. So, but there is, I mean, visibility and representation is complicated. And Scott, I'd love to talk to you, because Dominique just expressed how hyper visibility also can be dangerous. And yet we also know that invisibility has different consequences that come with it. I would love to hear from you what you feel your role is in that visibility conversation.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I mean, first, I think we all come from a place, I mean, everybody on this call was out before Trans Day of Visibility was even a glimmer in anyone's eye, right? We all know what it was like before the transgender tipping point of Hollywood, right? And I knew, as someone who was becoming a professional actor long before 2015, right, that I was going to have to sort of help change the world just so that I could like just be an artist, right? And so that's what my path has been. I've had to sort of do this dual thing of educating people, and that's where my consulting work really comes in, to create visibility just within the imaginations of the people out there working, especially in Hollywood, right? These very creative, visionary people needed some education just to make us visible in their own minds, right? And with regard to transmasculine invisibility, which is still really a thing, I mean, before Elliot Page came out just last month, I would ask anyone to name more than 2 trans guys in the public eye. And most people could point to Chaz Bono. Maybe they would say my name because I was standing right in front of them. But, you know, trans masculine people just did not have that kind of visibilities, and still our stories aren't being told. And I think a big reason for that is a lack of belief in who we are. And I think that's part of what visibility means, right? Like seeing is believing, right? There's this lack of belief that trans guys are or could possibly be men, right? I'm in a documentary that's making waves in the festival circuit right now called No Ordinary Man, which tells the story of Billy Tipton, who was a jazz musician in the 1950s and who, upon his death in the late 1980s, was discovered to be a transgender man. And he had married and adopted children, and it became this sort of huge media circus. And the media outlets at that time really sensationalized his story, calling him a woman pretending to be a man. Right. And that has really set the framework for how people see trans men. Other stereotypes include like ambitious women just trying to have jobs, which makes me laugh because I'm like, if it were that easy, there'd be no women. Everybody would just be men to have jobs, right? Like, just give it half a thought, right? But, you know, there's stories of Civil War soldiers that get twisted around, imagining that they're just women who would do anything to follow their loves, right? You know, people will sort of really make up any story not to acknowledge that trans men have existed across all time and every culture, the same as trans women have, and may I also add non-binary people, right? Another documentary that was just a big hit at Sundance is called My Name is Polly Murray, which was made by the same folks who did the Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary. And they did a great job in that to show that like there's literally a Black trans masculine person who is responsible for the legal framework underpinning the civil rights movement as we know it. From Polly Murray was instrumental in Board v. Brown, right? Brown v. Board of Education, sorry, right? And also in the On the Basis of Sex, Title VII work that Ruth Bader Ginsburg did, right? And even then in the documentary, they gave light to how Polly definitely described in Polly's own words, in Polly's own diaries, what any trans man can tell you is a trans masculine experience, but still used she, her pronouns because Polly had to pretend to be a woman given the culture in that time period, right? And so this invisibility, it has such a hugely negative impact. You know, as Dominique and Rain have said, visibility for trans women paints a target on your back. It gives somebody something to see and something to hate. But invisibility, right, creates this isolation, this feeling that you're the only one, this feeling you must be crazy because, or at least something effectively unspeakable in a culture that will not speak about you or tell your stories, right? And so it's really hard, you know, to see why fully 50%, that's 50% of trans men attempt suicide, right? Like visibility may get trans women killed, but invisibility makes us kill ourselves. So yeah, I think it's really like, this is why visibility is so important. And it's why I am someone, you know, I've had to be visible because we just weren't, but also it's why I stay visible, is again, just like my esteemed colleagues here have said, is just to give somebody something to hold on to, some way to see themselves reflected out in the world.
Well, thank you for the work that you're all doing, you know, being visible, being on screen, showing people the stories that they can resonate and relate to, because, you know, the works that you're creating aren't just for trans people. I mean, they're human stories, and that's why they're good stories. So thank you for doing that work. And I think to go back to the dangers of visibility and the dangers of invisibility, that largely hasn't been helped by horrible casting decisions for the last century. Fortunately, we've gotten past, I think, that moment that cisgender people are being cast in transgender roles. At least what I'm seeing on television is there is not one transgender character being played by a cisgender person. So the conversation has really now started widening into who's telling whose stories. So it's not just in front of the camera representation, it's also behind the camera representation. And I would love to first start with you, Dominique, your work on Pose. Obviously, there were some powerhouse trans producers, Janet Mock directing. What was that experience like of being on that set and being able to embody Elektra within that context? Was it different than other sets you've been on? How did that look for you?
So on Pose and telling our story, the first thing that had to happen was that those who were in power had to trust and believe that those of us who were supposedly new to the game could tell the story. And that's where the first bit of validation came. That's where the first bit of acknowledgement of what we knew, that we knew ourselves to be able to do this. Hence, we have Janet Mock and Stephen Knapp, and Our Lady J. So it was very important to me. And then for that, in order for me to be able to work and really pull Elektra, having these people in these positions helped me to focus on my character, on developing that, and not having to focus on, is the story going to be authentic? Is it going to be real? Is it going to be true? And I feel like in order for anyone to tell a story, you have to have the people involved, the people who have lived it, the people who understand it the most as a part of it. And so Pose was so refreshing to me in that instance. See, when I walk onto other sets, I don't go on as the trans blah, blah, blah. I go on as an actor telling someone else's story. So I go in with respect. I go in, my character may not call for certain things. So I am able to trust those in power. I'm able to trust the directors that they're telling the story authentically, and I'm going to be doing the same. With Pose, I knew the story from the beginning. The story is me, is us, is all of us. So therefore, to tell it authentically and then to act it and to relive trauma would have been very devastating. We may not have had the result that we have with it or with my performance. So therefore, for Pose, to have those people telling the story, people who knew, understand, and knew the questions to ask. Because if Janet Mock came to me and asked me about surgery, it would be very different from Brad Fulchuk sitting and having a conversation with me about my surgery. And these are the things we have to consider, because these stories are supposed to not only uplift, empower, and entertain, but also educate. Thank you.
Take that in for a moment. And I loved everything you said, Dominique, because you were able to be on that set and trust the stories that were being told and fully embody Elektra. We would not have Elektra had that set not been what it was. And so, Rain, I would love to hear from you. I'm a fan of all of yours. It's no secret. I tell you all the time. I would love to hear for you the process of creating your own works, because you're a producer, you act, you're also a producer, you teach acting. For us, tell us a little bit more about the experience of creating your own sets and what that has elicited for you in your art.
Yeah, well, creating has been very liberating for me, because, I started out just as an actor when I came into Hollywood and was in all the acting classes that was advertised and was auditioning. But then it was very frustrating because I kept being put in these boxes and going out for these roles that were very stereotypical and not very representative of who I was or what I could do. And I was either not trans enough or not Asian enough or not this enough. It was all of that. And so I quit acting for a little while and I learned filmmaking, got a job in a post-production facility, and I just started learning how to do all of this and what was needed in order to make a film. And so, my first one, which was Ryan's, rom-com, and very, it's trans-led, but like very me, and very all the characters that I was inspired by and grew up watching, like Sandra Bullock and Julia Roberts. And it really opened doors for me and got me my team, and it helped me get Lopez. And I remember just being like, wow, that actually worked. And it felt so liberating, because before Ryan's, no one really knew what I could do or what I was capable of. They only just assumed. And so, with that being out there, the auditions started to change. And the roles that started coming to my way were more in line of what I wanted to do. Um, but then, uh, because I'm trans, and because I'm Asian American, and because Hollywood is still what it was during that time, it it was a pivotal moment for me, but it wasn't sort of this life-changing thing. It was just sort of like, okay, that was a step. What else is next? And Transparent had just ended, and I was kind of had this vision in my head about a community of artists. And so that's when I started this Now More Than Ever group. And um, it was an artist collective at the time. And, we had scripts coming in, and reading them out loud twice a month. And so Razor Tongue came out of that as another necessity, because after Lopez and a bunch of other things that I was doing, I was still finding myself to be the only one. And going back to what Dominique was saying, you know, uh, I wanted to act, but I also became the consultant, for my character, and for my storylines. And people would come to me and say, is this okay to say? Or sometimes they won't even ask me, and so I would have to find it find the courage to actually say something and advocate for the community. um, and so with Razor Tongue, it just sort of like, okay, I envisioned this set that was like purely queer and trans, and just anybody within the LGBTQ in LA. And uh, it became this thing where, like, it, I don't know, it inspired me. At the time, I was like, I knew what I was feeling, and I knew what I wanted, but it kept inspiring me, and it just gave me this vision of what is possible for our community and for the artists here that are just really starving for work, and starving for the kinds of content that we know we're capable of. And uh and now it's something that, like, I think I was telling Scott the other day, I've never been one to really follow the rules. um and I've always sort of lived outside of the box because of all of the intersections of my identity. And I realize it's actually what works for me. I mean, I would love to go on set and act. I would love to just, like, audition for a role and act my heart out. And that happens too. But there's something so much more liberating and something so much more powerful when you're creating the kind of content that is necessary, and it's needed. And I constantly get pushed back with some of my writing and some of the work that I do. We got some pushback with Ryan's and Razor Tongue. And Razor Tongue was, well, why is she just saying she's trans at the last episode and not in the first episode? Shouldn't we know that she's trans in the first episode? So there's a lot of that. But then I stuck with my guns. And now what people say to me is, I love that she didn't out herself until the last episode. Like, that's the reaction we get now. And so, it's really hard to be a creator and be, a writer and wear many hats. But there, like going back to our first, thing that we were talking about, there's just this, it's not just passion for me anymore. It's the necessity aspect of it that continues to push me to keep moving forward.
And someday people will be saying Julia Roberts, Sandra Bullock, Rain Valdez. I think everyone on this call can agree. Yes, everyone is saying yes. Scott, you also straddle this multi-hyphenate world of doing everything, consulting, producing, acting. And, some of it is born of the necessity of, like, if people aren't telling our stories in the way that we know they can be told, like as Rain did, I'm going to do it myself. Can you talk a little bit what your experience has been? And even if you want to talk about your work at GLAAD as well, would love to hear how you've navigated that intersection.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll talk artist first because that's the goal, right? So I have 3 one-man shows, but the last one that I made is called Becoming a Man in 127 Easy Steps. And the reason that I called it that was because I wanted to show, because at the time that I made it, it was like, I didn't have any concept that I could possibly have the life that I have now, which is saying something, right? And so I was like, okay, if I'm gonna have to tell the same story for the rest of my life, just do this one person show, I'm gonna make it pretty epic. So it's 127 different pieces, and the audience would call out a number, and it was sort of this interactive thing, and you'd get a different show every night because, you'd call out 42, they would always call out 69, 71, 103, right? And so I sort of co-created this work, and it became a really interesting acting exercise for me, right? So that I could stretch my wings and really, find my range. All of them have different tones and the whole thing. So it was a whole big exercise. And since, now I have this platform, we decided, look, let's make this something that anyone can access. And so we turned it into a film, like a one-man show special. But again, this intersection of being a trans guy and culture just not being ready for it. I'm, at least 10 years ahead. Hopefully time seems to be speeding up, so hopefully less, but I was certainly 10 years ahead when I started doing the show. And now I'm reaching this place. And, when Rain and I were talking, I was like, I keep getting to this place where I literally have to, tell acquisitions executives that, no, I'm not a trans woman. Transgender people can be men as well, and non-binary. And, like I literally have to have that level of a one-on-one conversation, and that people just aren't ready for transmasculine stories. As the great author Thomas Page McBee said, we're not in the culture's imagination yet. Right. So we're going to release in 2021, whether we have to do it independently or not. Like, this is definitely going to happen because of the state of affairs right now. Right. There are conversations being had, especially about young transmasculine people accessing the kind of healthcare that they need to have, and just their agency and their ability to know who they are and be who they are. So I really want to offer this out into the world one way or another, so that at least we're actually participating in the conversation that's being had about us, right? But so to get to the other piece of it, the educational work that I have to do, I'm a senior consultant at GLAAD, and that came about after I had the historic first of being the first out trans person in daytime television. And I met Nick Adams, and he was media training me for that role. And he said, wait, you kind of know how to do this. And I was like, yeah, I'm an educator. That's what I do. And so I've ended up working for GLAAD, and I do a full spectrum there. And I also have been able to do this work as an independent consultant, because GLAAD has so much work to do that there's this extra level of care that's needed for other shows. So, yes, it's true. We are getting to a place, and I think Dominique really said this well, where people do trust and believe that we have the ability to tell our own stories. And still, the example of Pose is really rare. But the good thing is I'm finding the people in power, the producers, the financiers, they are realizing that they don't know what they don't know, and they need help with that, especially in an industry where authenticity wins you prizes, for instance, right? So that's where the trans consultant role really comes to bear. And because of my experience as, a writer, as an actor, and also in trans education, I've become recognized as someone who knows how to tell stories, right? And who has an analysis of the work, because it's not just about, I don't just go in and say, as one trans person, I give you an opinion on how to tell your story. Not at all. I'm someone with a real deep analysis of what works for the trans community in terms of authenticity, but also for audiences who are really bored of the conversation that we've been having around trans people, right? And so I'm helping artists succeed, right? And I've done that for Blumhouse's The Craft, The Shy on Showtime, and some other big films that I can't talk about yet. And most recently and most intensively on Euphoria on HBO. I started with them on season 1, and I'm going back in to work with them on season 2. And I really work with Sam Levinson on a very granular level, from script to screen, right? And together with Hunter Schafer, the amazing trans actress who plays Jules on that show, we go really deep on the scripts to create a really nuanced character who is what audiences want to see, right? Which is to say, a character whose transness is just a part of an otherwise really complex life and a larger story. And I work with every single department on set. I work with costumes, I work with makeup, audio, stunts, right? And I brought this work to GLAAD. We've trained IATSE, the crew members union, to make sure that sets can be really safe places where, like Dominique said, you can just go on and act, right? And not have to worry about having conversations about surgery with anybody, right? So yeah, that's, it's this kind of full circle bit of work that I found has put me really at the center of this conversation, right? I'm really, in this place where I see all of the work that's happening, and I see the way that culture is changing around it. And this is a thing that I always say now, because getting that deep into the center of how Hollywood does representation, whenever I give activist talks now, the activists in the room are like, it's dire, it's awful. And it is, right? If you look at the bills that are currently ravaging the South right now, Arkansas, Alabama, Missouri, right? Like the bills that are going around making it a felony to help suicidal transgender children, right? Get the medical care they need to make their insides and their outsides match, which is the care that doctors say is the right thing to do, making that a felony for doctors to do that. Yes, it's dire. And also, right, it is changing. There are so many people who really care about doing this right? And that representation is going to change the way that people see us in the world and see our needs and see what we need and, get ready to help.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good, all of you have. It's authentic stories lend themselves to humanizing people's experiences and getting to know people actually for who they are, not for the projections that have been put on screen about them that are oftentimes so not in the realm of any reality any of us have ever known or seen, because it hasn't been coming from our perspectives. And I hope, as someone that works at GLAAD, the goal is for everyone who I'm sitting with, Scott, Dominique, Rain, everyone not on this call, to be able to pursue their passions full on, without having to do anything that doesn't feel authentic to who they are. Because also we work with a lot of people who will say, well, we got a trans consultant, or we got a trans person who's my sister's cousins, nieces, nephews, gardeners, aunts, brother, who consulted. And what we have here are expert storytellers. These are people that know the industry, know how to tell a story that can entertain and educate simultaneously and elicit empathy. So I think it's important to say that, because ultimately the goal is any of these fine actors to be able to walk onto a set and be able to trust what the story being told is, if they are not being brought on to produce or consult. So we've gotten into a lot. I wanted to start bringing in some of the audience questions and engagement. There was a question that came to us prior to us having this conversation, but I think it lends itself to what we were talking about with hypervisibility and the burden of visibility when there are so few people who are well known as trans in the world. What's it like to be someone who's so well known and public? How do you navigate that hypervisibility, and what would help you do it? That's to anybody. It's a hard one. I can.
Okay, so I'll take it. Can you repeat it again, please?
Yes, of course. So what is it like to be someone who is so well known and public in your persona, in your acting career? How do you navigate that hypervisibility of being a trans person in the world?
At times it is, and Rain touched on this in the beginning about saying, refortifying, and that she was a very private person. And so am I. The visibility at times can be scary, but, and then there's the factor of not knowing who is approaching you, what they're going to do. That aspect of it can be scary, but we've been a resilient people for quite a while, and that resilience comes in and it steps in, and I get to step out of that box and I get to enjoy it, because there is the other part of it of people running up to you and going, I didn't speak to my son for 10 years, and I just happened to glimpse at Pose, so thank you. We had dinner a week ago and we caught up, and I'm gonna try. I have people coming up to me at times going, you taught me how to be strong. And I'm like, you know what? She taught me how to be, Electra taught me how to be even stronger also, so there is a great side to it. It is the knowledge of knowing that you are helping people, even though you are sacrificing at times your own space, your own comfort, you have to be vulnerable if you really want to be authentic to the world, and then hide away at times. But there is that pure satisfaction of knowing that that person in some small place, like I'm from an island called Tobago, that's a part of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And for me, if I were able to see myself, I would have dreamed even further, dreamed even harder. I would have, but nothing happens before its time. But what I am trying to say, the visibility is both rewarding and at times scary.
That makes complete sense. And to your point, Dominique, as well, I think a lot of times labels are thrown on to people. I know that I've personally had the experience of having the label of an activist thrown on to me when I don't call myself an activist, because we're just wanting equality and to live in the world safely and equally. You have something to share?
Darling, I woke up one morning and was reading my bio, and it said activist, advocate, author, and a model. And I said, okay, only probably one of these things is true, because I didn't, when I wrote my book, it was therapy for me. My therapist said, listen, write it down, it'll help you. And then I thought to myself, whoa, I'm gonna put this out there into the world in its raw form. Like, I'm not gonna have anyone to publish it because I'm no one, but it's just the idea that I accomplished something, I did it, So it was like the labels get thrown onto you, and all I was trying to do was live. I was trying to show my family that being trans did not mean that I was an abomination, did not mean that I could not be successful. And that was my path. That's where I set out. It wasn't to be an activist or an advocate. It just so happened that people throw these labels on. The only real labels that I do claim is actor and model. I claim, and human. That's what I really claim. My transness is because I have to let people know that we do exist. I cannot live stealth because that would be dangerous not only to myself, but to others. So yeah, we have to be out here. We have to be thinking. And you're right, activist and advocate is not a job title. And people believe that it is. It's just many of us who are out here doing what we do because we're so sick and tired of being denied, of being held back, of being oppressed, of being marginalized, knowing that we have the talent, knowing that we can bring progress to the world and people are holding us back. So when we get up there, we have to say, yes, I'm a trans woman. So trans people, trans girls know, yes, you too can make it. And not just make it to Hollywood, but make it in any job or field that you desire.
What more can you say? There you go. Done. I do want to say, I'm seeing in the chat, there's people saying, yes, no labels. And, people bring this up a lot. They sort of say, why do you have to talk about it all the time? Why do you always have to put trans forward? And exactly that, it's like, because if I didn't, no one would know that we were around. People wouldn't understand how hard it is. One of the things when they say, oh, you're the first out trans actor, whether it's in daytime television or to have a, Emmy nomination as a trans man, right? Like, what's important about saying that is it was really hard to do. It's very difficult to be an out trans person and get any kind of acting role, first of all, much less to achieve an Emmy nomination for it, right? Like, it's actually so many more steps in the way to get there, right? Bless you, Dominique, right? Right, and for so many reasons, bless you. Right? And so, the thing about labels is they are really important to us in the moment when we first realize that they apply to us. They give us a community. I remember being a young person, having gone through my life thinking I was the only person on earth who felt the way I did, and then meeting another person who identified as a trans man who said, kid, I think you're just a trans guy, right? And then who gave me a book, Transgender Warriors, right? That is a history book full of transgender people out there, right? And to know that there'd been a culture that we've existed like the way stars shine in the daytime, right? They still shine out there. And to just to be able to see myself as part of a group and not an individual who's isolated, right? And yes, as I have grown through 20 years now of being out in the world as a trans person, right? Being trans really isn't the label that matters the most to me at all. But I do have to put it forward. I am talking about it all the time because I know that you are not there yet, right? I will stop using the trans label when you stop making it a big deal, right? If we can integrate like that, I am so ready for that. And I think so many of us are. So what can we do to get there is my question. I
completely echo everything that Scott and Dominique is saying. It's such a double-edged sword, hypervisibility and being out and proud as a trans individual. For me, this past year, because of COVID and quarantine, I had the opportunity to be even so much more private than I had been in the past few years because of, my work and visibility. And it made me realize why community is very important, but also that the only time I'm ever labeled or referred to as trans is usually when a cisgender identifying heterosexual person witnesses me living my best life and they can't handle it. So they have to name it in order to justify their discomfort, or I name it in order to create a bridge for understanding. But either way, it gets named. And so it made me realize that having community is really important, because when we're together, it's not even about the labels. It's really just about each other and supporting each other and loving one another and continuing to build and create space for our community. And, my acting class, my students, my kids continually tell me how much I've changed their lives. And sometimes I wonder, and I try and tell them as much as I can that how much they've actually changed my life and how much they've actually given me purpose. because as much as we have community, as much as we have each other, the double-edged sword will always be there. The haters and the trolls will be there. And kind of like what Scott was saying, you know, we're constantly being asked about our transness in the media, but I don't think it's because we think it's the most interesting thing about us. I think it's because they think it's the most interesting thing about us. So, you know, sometimes it's kind of like we kind of have to turn the tables and ask back, well, you know, why do you keep talking about it?
It's a great question. And I think it's important for everyone here to ask that, because one of the gifts I just want to share that I hear from so many trans people, the trans community, is we have so many gifts to share that can, I think, help illuminate paths for people who are not trans to have self-awareness and to live an authentic life and to find your truth, even if it's hard. Those are all things that I think so many people could benefit from, because it goes back to self-definition and self-determination and autonomy, individualism, uniqueness. Like, who are you as a person if you are determining and deciding for yourself? You're all brilliant. We are coming up a little on time, so I'm going to start wrapping up and then we'll get to some questions. But I want to ask first and foremost, what is your dream role, job? What's next for you? Let's manifest it here with our Out at Meredith family. What is that for you, if you have it in your mind?
I do, but I just have to do this one bit. Darling, I have no dream job because I do not dream of labor. Okay, I just had to give you all
Beautiful.
that one
Perfect.
bit because I was watching it on TikTok and I did it as my character as a lecturer. And when the episode airs, I'm going to show it there. But as far as the dream role, that role that as a child, I was very fearful of vampires. And I came across the movie Vamp with Grace Jones. Life-changing, because this woman did that entire movie and did not say a word. It was just that the presence, her presence, everything, it was just so encompassing, so profound that I no longer feared vampires. I embraced them. So for my dream role, I know everyone thought I would say Storm. In my head, just the fact that people believe I can play that role is enough satisfaction for me. But as far as the dream role, it would be that vampire role that goes on and on forever. Let's revive Queen of the Damned or something, but I love it. Somebody
make that happen, please. That's all I want now. That's what I'm manifesting for myself as well. Thank you for sharing that, Dominique. I can't wait.
Oh, I need the charger, honey.
I think, Rain, should we let you have the last word? Since I know it's going to be so good. You know, for me, there have been two things for my entire life that I knew about myself. And one was that I was a guy. Like I knew I was a boy when I was a tiny kid. And I knew that the world had that weirdly twisted, right? And I also knew that I'm supposed to be a movie star. Like that was my number one thing. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a man and a movie star. And now that I have actually starred in 2 movies, right, I realize what I mean by that. And what I mean by that is I want to be working consistently. First of all, I do dream of labor, but I dream of labor in the most creative sense, right? Which is to be engaging with really meaty roles, right? The kind of roles where you are conveying the essence of being human to people, right? That is what I'm going for in any role that I can get. And so I think that's part of why I'm fighting so hard, is because that is something that it would be rare for any person to get to have, to get to have it as someone who's had to take so many more steps to get to this place, you know, is important, but also to open that space and to hold open that door so that anyone like me can do that in the future too. You know, so there's just like, there's a lot wrapped up in it. But at the same time, I don't believe those ideas would have been put in my head if they were not achievable. And so I'm here for it.
I'm here for that too. You both are so inspiring. I mean, I think most of you know what I'm about to say because I say it all the time, but I still dream, and I'm still dreaming about it, to be in a full length feature. It doesn't even have to be high budget, but romance or romantic comedy as the lead with a very high profile actor. That's still a dream of mine because even though I work in rom-coms, it's not in that caliber yet. So I have a few things in the works, but I think sometimes it's going to take that high profile involvement to actually really make a dent in the world. And you know how much I love romantic comedies and how much that I believe romantic comedies are propaganda for who gets to be loved. And when it comes to, you know, trans representation in romantic comedies, it's been the opposite of that. And so I think it's a necessity. I think that we look for these possibilities in entertainment and in all of these media forms that we have the privilege to work in. And so for me, comedy, rom-coms, it's you know, gets a bad rap for being a fluff and a chick flick, but it's actually, I think, the most political genre of all of them because of the message that it puts out there. And, you know, for decades, we've been told that those who get to be loved has been cisgender, heterosexual, moneyed, and great looking people, and mostly white. And so that's still a dream of mine, and I'm not going to stop until it happens.
And it will. I mean, all of these people are so revolutionary in the way they envision and act in and create stories that matter. I mean, to Rain's point, love stories are propaganda for who gets to be loved. And there was a question about how do we balance the greater representation with also the increasing and escalating prevalence of violence. And I genuinely believe, to what Rain said, the more that we see stories of trans people being loved, that will not only show us that that's possible, but it will show other people how to do it. Last word. And I've been incorporating some of the Q&A into what we've been talking about. Don't worry, I didn't just bypass it. Last words, what would you say to anyone who is trans of all ages, figuring out who they are and needing some wisdom or advice? And that's for each of you.
I mean, I just wish that I could go back in time to the little kid that I was and tell him, you know, and say, hey, actually what you know about yourself right now, you absolutely do know it. And I take every opportunity I can to say that, especially given the assault against young people right now. The idea that kids don't know who they are. I mean, sure, kids can make choices that, you know, don't stand the test of time, but not when it comes to your gender. If you're questioning your gender at such a young age, that's a deep internal knowing. And also, by the way, growing and changing is what we're put on earth to do. So it doesn't matter what you become, right? I think that's something that I would, and it's something that I do say all the time. You know who you are, and who you are becoming is unwritten. Go out and make it great, whatever that is, you know? I think everybody needs to hear that, but particularly trans people and trans kids, especially.
I think it's so easy to get consumed with everything that's so stacked against us, and it makes it really hard for us to figure out what we can do for ourselves or for anyone, because there's, you know, the hate and the violence and all of these anti-trans bills coming out of the gate. But I remember, for me, the thing that kind of kept me going was when I discovered that regardless of how much love I wasn't getting from the world or how much I wanted from the world, I realized how much there was in here, and kind of just let that guide me. So I would say look within you and know that you were born with so much love, and start moving mountains for someone that you care about. Start moving mountains with your own community, and start finding each other. And the more you do that, the more you're pulled, the more you just start creating space and building. And for me, that's something that I've started to learn about more about myself and the people that I surround myself with, is that we really just draw from that love.
And that was, oh, were you finished, Rain? I'm sorry, I hope I didn't. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. And just to continue with everything, because everything that was said already is just, you know, so a part of the truth. It's a part of the reality. But I would also say that you are not wrong for who you are. Who you are is not wrong. Your truth is not wrong. Believe that. The world may be hard, but brace yourself and know that in your truth, you can accomplish and achieve anything that you want to. Lead with kindness and do not ever let hatred consume you.
Well, everybody, that does it. I don't know if we could have had a more Super Soul Wednesday conversation for Trans Day of Visibility. Thank you so much, Scott, Rain, Dominique, Jason, for helping organize this, the Out at Meredith team. This has been such a true pleasure. I hope you feel as full as I do right now. Thank you again, and stick around, panelists. We're going to take a photo.
And I wanted to thank all of you on behalf of Meredith and the Out at Meredith committee, and also just to say that because of our attendees, we have met our goal of raising $500 for the Transgender Law Center, and thank you all again. I mean, your visibility makes all of us better, and there were so many moments and so many quotes, but you know, the stars really did shine in the daytime today with you guys. And Alex, thank you so much again for leading this for us, and we certainly believe in the good work that GLAAD does. We are better for that too, so thank you. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Stick around, we'll take a photo and then be on our way.